Oh, Monty, I'll start then, I guess. When you looked at your group, have they been able to rebound from a couple of COVID cases, and are players still feeling any effects at all, do you know?
I think if we look at it on an individual basis, there's probably one or two that we need to be reasonably vigilant around that may have had some more effect than others. I mean, as we know, in line with the community, some people have been hit a lot harder than others. Some it just sort of brushes over them, and others it's a little bit heavy. So we've got a bit of a case-by-case mentality here. But to be fair, for the most part, everyone's very, very good and tracking nicely. So on return, there's been no fears.
Would they have to modify any programs for anybody? Like you just hear, friends and family you may have encountered that say that it's knocked them around a little bit. Have any of the players sort of reported that? Have they done sort of modified programs since coming back?
So again, we probably have more of a vigilant look. We have some guys that we need to tick a few things off when they get here. They're usually the guys that have carried more symptoms than others. But as a group, look, to be perfectly honest, we're committed to pushing forward. We're not letting the day-to-day roll call weigh us down in any way. We know the program's good. We need to push it forward. And I think to be really perfectly honest, I think the mature group that we have here is up for that challenge and so far have been very, very good.
So how do you go about training then with regards to that? If players just miss sessions, then it's sort of up to them to catch up and you just forge ahead? That's basically the attitude, is just to embrace what's going to be pretty unpredictable, I suppose?
Yeah, certainly embrace what might be around the corner. Like it's not quite an hour-to-hour thing, but it's certainly day-to-day. You'd be wise to be able to pivot and be flexible, which I think we are. I think we've been able to upskill our players over the last at least 2 years that, there's obstacles around every corner and we just get on with it. So, we've got enough resource here, we've got enough good eyes and enough wise heads to work out who needs a little bit more, who needs to top up, who needs to pull back. So, I think to this point we've managed it really, really well. And I think from here we're only getting numbers back. So we're quite buoyant about things right now.
Beauty. Thanks, Monty. I'll let someone else have a question.
Monty, I think last week CD said you were missing about 25%. Is that better this week? You've got more back?
Yeah, really fortunate today to say that we've got good numbers out here. Again, by me being not able to answer that question to the number probably shows you that we're not really weighed down by it in any way. We do know that at times we will miss a few and we'll get a few back. And today, sitting here right now, we've got more back than we've got missing, so we're in a good space. Great session today. We saw some habits that were certainly there that took us to the finals last year, and we're great to see that passion and spirit back on the track, even though some might have a bit of a heavy heart for what's happening in the background.
Just yourself, obviously you've moved into the midfield role this season. What changes are you hoping to implement? Is there any personnel changes that you'd like to see, game style? How do you want to make your stamp on that role?
I think what we do want to do, between Ken and myself, is we want to make sure our midfield really complement all phases of our game. And we've got a really talented midfield. It's a great time for our older heads like Robbie, Travis and Ollie to integrate some new players. We know that we've got good young talent here that's ready to take another step. And I guess the natural progression for those younger guys is more midfield time. So I'm here to try and facilitate that. Make sure that they have some excitement and some reliability around the three phases, whether it be stoppage, whether they're really responsible in defence, or whether they've got some potency when we attack. So I think what we're trying to do is just strengthen around our midfield group, whether it be through new talent, through more numbers, or just some greater detail. They've been a good group for many, many years, and hopefully I'm just here to push them to another level.
Can you name some of those new ones that you think are banging on the door to get in there?
Yeah, I mean, apart from those obvious guys that everyone loves to talk about, me included, in Xavier, Connor and Butsy, there's some young talent that hasn't had the looks that perhaps they've deserved in Miles Bergman, Jackson Mead for sure. Jed McAtee's another one that might get some time as well. And then some newer players as well that we got into the club like Josh Sin. So really exciting with the stocks. We've got to make sure they're ready. We don't want to displace any older players that have got all the runs on the board just for the sake of it. But we think there is some merit in improving and in growing that grill and making sure we carry and spread some load.
And is that something you'll look at, I guess, in a match capacity in an internal trial or the pre-season game to give them a good look at it?
Yeah, a bit of that. I think the modern day and even more so this year, there's so much match play and training. You wouldn't have to wait to an internal. You wouldn't have to wait to a Fremantle or a Crows game to see that. They get a lot of exposure in minutes of training these days that there's not a lot that goes unnoticed. So we had a great session out here today that had some stoppage focus that we got a lot of education into a lot of young guys. So we were really pleased with that. And those guys I've already mentioned, they were a big part of that.
Thank you.
Monty, is Lockie Jones one that might be able to go through the midfield this year at some point? He seems to have, I guess, the body for it.
Look, I don't see why not. I think someone like Lockie and even those guys I mentioned before, like Jackson Mead and Miles Bergman, there shouldn't be any limitations on what these guys can do. The only thing is they come in with some prior learning and some prior experiences in a position because they've been a good player for a long time as a kid. But they're just great traits when they get here that can be applied to any area. So if I talk Lockie specifically, I've got no doubts that with some experience, with some education and some exposure, I think Lockie Jones could make it in any of the areas. So I've got a keen eye on him for the midfield. I think he'll get his first start as a defender, just because that's probably a little bit fairer on him. But as I've said, like those other young guys, why put a ceiling on these guys? They've got exceptional talent. He's another one.
Yeah, probably the main, I guess, one of the main takeouts from the loss to the Bulldogs in the preliminary final was that maybe Port Adelaide needs to improve its midfield depth. I guess, how do you feel, being tasked with that role to an extent?
Oh, look, I think it'd be tempting to really bite at that narrative. I'm not really sure that's necessarily the issue. I think we're talking about one game where it was pretty much dysfunctional all over the ground for whatever reason. So, but what I can tell you today is that I am interested and passionate about growing the depth in there. I'm passionate about making them a little bit more detailed in what they do and how they apply themselves to all phases of the game. So I'm excited. It's a great opportunity for me. Hopefully they see it the same way.
And with Trav, I guess, is he full kind of midfielder this year, or how do you see his role? I guess, another year older for him, even though he seems to be so evergreen. Yeah,
difficult one to answer, but what I can tell you is Travis is committed to making sure that whether he's playing or whether he's winding up, he'll leave an amazing legacy because he'll make sure that the guys that are good enough, hungry enough to take his spot, they'll be ready and they'll be deserving of it. So he's got a passionate investment in growing those guys. So I'm really excited for Travis's year, to be honest. I don't see anyone going past him. I have seen no reason to suggest that. But the challenge is out there to those guys mentioned to try and take it off him.
Yeah, just one word from me. I guess, how do you improve Ollie Wines, I guess, off a Brownlow year?
Well, it's always a tough question when you've got the best player in the competition is voted by the umpires and to be honest, a lot of his peers. It's going to be difficult, but he's pretty good at self-assessing. He knows he's got room to grow. He does a lot of things extremely well, and that's a bit of a no-brainer. But he's got room to move, like every player on our list. Travis is another one. Robbie's another one. If they were sitting here right now, they'd be able to rattle off 2 or 3 things they could easily improve to take this team forward in themselves. So Ollie's no different.
Thanks, Monty.
Monty, just from me, Brendan from Network 10. Non-COVID related, can you just give an update on who's injured at the moment or not tracking too well at the moment?
It's a good question. It's not something I spend too much time. I guess we've got some limitations in Orazio Fantasia at the moment, who he trained fully the other day, so he's not necessarily all that far away, but he is on some sort of reduced time. Miles Bergman's another one. I think you guys are well across that he had a redo of that screw in his shoulder from his pre-season surgery. Kane Farrell still improving from that ACL, but tracking outstandingly well. And we've got a 4-day break coming up, which off the back of that, we'll see him return to some drills. So there's just 3 that aren't part of everything we do training-wise, but are not too far away.
Well, I had. Thank you.
No worries.
Hey, Monty, can I just clarify, are there things that just sorry, back on the COVID stuff, not to labour the point, but are there things that you guys are doing or telling the players to do to mitigate any risk, like their own drink bottles or staying away from each other, any of those sort of precautions?
I think the common sense rule's been applied again, but as I said earlier, these are not necessarily hugely different to anything that we've heard over the last 2 years. Yeah, we've got some. We took some precautions pre-Christmas that set us up to get a good 2-3 week block that was unaffected. We returned from Christmas and obviously conditions had changed or worsened, but we were set up to make sure we were ready to tackle that. So I think the whole thing around water bottles and time together and socialising inside or whatever it is, these are not new messages. Yep, they might weigh us down at times, but as I said, we've got a group here, staff and players that are committed to pushing forward. So no new measures, just more common sense.
And lastly from me, who's going to help Charlie out this year? I know it's sort of not yours, more Bass's area, of course, but Charlie's been a beacon and a focal point, and he just attracts so much attention from the opposition defenders. Who's going to lend him a bit of a hand?
Yeah, I think you can answer that a couple of ways. We can obviously sit here and talk about Todd Marshall's growth, and I think we'd be crazy not to acknowledge Mitch Georgiadis as a bona fide AFL player and his rapid rate of improvement. But we have to be able to complement that with style, and style is how we move it, where we move it to, and no, not one part can be more important than the other. But and like I said, we brought so there's the natural improvement of those guys around him, some change to maybe how we deliver it, and then there's the recruits. We've got a new ruckman who's a young fella, Byzantini, that could just shock a few, and then we got the more hardened professional in Finlayson. It's an opportunity for him.
And could you see Sam Hayes having an impact in your midfield time? Do you get a look at him and what he's been able to deliver?
I think in Hazy's point of view, from Hazy's point of view, he's deserving of an opportunity. Yeah, he's got a very, very good ruckman in front of him in Scott Lysette, but he's done enough, he's shown enough, he's passionate enough and puts in the yards that when that opportunity presents, we just have to go to him. We have to give him that chance. Really like the way he started pre-season. We've got a new ruck coach in Matt Lobe, where they've bonded really well. So I think that just shows that we've got an investment in Hazy. He's just got to show us a little bit more when that opportunity fronts up, and we've got to have the confidence in playing him.
Beauty. Thanks, Monty.
Hey, Monty, just I guess for the past couple of years, the coaching team at Port Adelaide has been really settled. I guess how has it been with a couple of changes in the off season with Bossy and Scully going to different clubs?
Yeah, two great coaches of this club. I think two great people around this place. So they're always hard to replace. So what I would say to that is it's always nice to freshen as well, and that'd be the case if myself or Bass or someone else wasn't here. We do get IP with change, which is always nice. I think that's a nice little cycle of life, if you like, of coaching, that you can bring some new talent or some new ideas in. Obviously, we've lost some good people, so we'll really need to work hard to cover those two because they have been around the traps for a while. But we think we've brought in some guys that have got some energy and spirit and bring some new things. So don't think we've noticed too much so far, but it's going to be a long season. So a few of us will have to pick up some slack, but we've also got some new fresh people as well.
Just one more for me, I guess, pretty broad question. What do you kind of expect in terms of game trends for 2022? Do you see the game changing in any way from 2021, I guess?
Not necessarily. It's probably a little bit early to talk about that. Obviously, the AFL are sensitive to keeping the ball moving, which they are every season. So there's some stricter interpretations about delay and other things. So that they flag their intention to keep it going. As a club, we're not training anything massively different. We're trying to tighten a few things up. We're a pretty good team that gets to the pointy end pretty regularly, so we know that the changes aren't massive. But who knows, with the lack of training minutes that do get into some players, if this continues, there may be some restrictions around game time that may need to come into it just to manage and make sure the game's in good shape. If some guys haven't quite got the training into themselves that maybe they have previously.
All good, guys?
Sorry, Monty, just one more from me. Sorry, I just thought of it then. What's your thoughts on the new holding the ball rule in terms of the 360 degrees and pinning the player?
Okay, we haven't actually met to discuss the topic. I mean, we're all over it. We've seen the interpretations. We'll meet this afternoon to bring our collective thoughts. If you're asking me, I think whether it's the new or stricter interpretation of the 360 or it's the common sense around players trying to gain some delay for their defence, for me, I think they're just natural decisions that potentially should have been made in the past. I don't think they're changes. I think it's just more common sense and a tightening of things that probably should have already been there.